long before the whispers of the Holy Grail echoed through the shadowed halls of medieval Europe, a legend was born, rooted deeply in the tumultuous soil of 5th century Britain. This was a land fractured, where the fading light of Roman order had given way to a mosaic of warring kingdoms, each vying for supremacy amidst the encroaching darkness. The year was, perhaps, around 470 AD, a time when the memories of Roman legions were still fresh, but their protective embrace long gone, leaving the native Britons vulnerable to the relentless incursions of Saxon raiders from across the narrow sea. It was into this crucible of chaos and desperate hope that the tale of Arthur, a name that would forever be entwined with destiny, first began to unfurl. The air itself seemed to hum with an ancient magic in those days. A magic that seeped from the very stones of the land, from the gnarled roots of ancient oaks, and from the mists that clung to the valleys. It was a time when the veil between the seen and unseen was thin, and the Druidic traditions, though challenged by the nascent spread of Christianity, still held a powerful sway over the hearts and minds of the people. In this era of profound uncertainty, a prophecy began to circulate, carried on the wind from isolated hermitages and whispered in the flickering firelight of humble cottages. It spoke of a king, not born of conventional lineage, but chosen by a divine sign, one who would unite the fractured lands and bring forth an age of peace and justice. This prophecy, often attributed to the enigmatic figure of Merlin, a sorcerer and seer whose wisdom was as deep as the earth and as vast as the sky, foretold the coming of a true king, one who would be recognized not by crown or scepter, but by an act of unparalleled purity and strength. Merlin, a figure shrouded in mist and mystery, was said to possess knowledge gleaned from forgotten ages, capable of seeing the threads of fate woven into the fabric of time. He served as an advisor to kings, yet his true allegiance was to the destiny of Britain itself. It was he who, according to the legends, orchestrated the very circumstances of Arthur's birth, ensuring that the child of prophecy would be hidden away from the dangers of the world until the appointed time. The story tells of Uther Pendragon, a powerful but troubled king, who, through a series of magical deceptions orchestrated by Merlin, sired a child with Igraine, the Duchess of Cornwall. This act, born of desire and magic, was fraught with consequence, and Merlin, ever the pragmatist of destiny, demanded the child be given into his care immediately after birth. Thus, the infant Arthur, his true parentage a secret known only to a select few, was spirited away from the royal court and entrusted to the care of Sir Ector, a loyal and honorable knight who raised him as his own son, alongside his biological son, Kay. Arthur grew up in blissful ignorance of his royal blood, learning the ways of chivalry and warfare not as a prince, but as a squire, honing his skills with sword and shield in the dusty training yards, dreaming of a future where he could serve a worthy lord. The years passed, and Britain's plight deepened. The Saxon invasions grew more relentless, their longships disgorging warriors onto the shores, their axes felling the ancient trees and their fires consuming the fragile settlements. The land cried out for a leader, a unifying force that could rally the disparate tribes and stem the tide of invasion. It was then, when hope seemed a distant memory and despair threatened to consume the land, that the miraculous sign foretold by Merlin appeared. In the heart of London, amidst the ruins of Roman grandeur, a great stone appeared, seemingly from nowhere, embedded with a magnificent sword. Upon the sword's hilt, or perhaps etched into the stone itself, were words that resonated with the ancient prophecy, declaring that whoever could draw the sword from the stone was the true and rightful king of all Britain. This event, perhaps occurring around the late 5th or early 6th century, depending on the historical interpretations of the Arthurian period, became a beacon of hope, drawing knights and lords from every corner of the land. Many came, men of great strength and noble lineage, each convinced that destiny had chosen them. They strained and pulled, their muscles bulging, their faces contorted with effort, but the sword remained stubbornly embedded, as if it were a part of the very earth itself. The air around the stone thrummed with a palpable sense of anticipation and frustration. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, yet no one could achieve the feat. The assembled lords began to grumble, their initial hope giving way to cynicism and renewed infighting. Some historians debate whether such a public spectacle truly occurred, or if it was a symbolic narrative woven into the fabric of the legend to legitimize Arthur's rule in a time of political unrest. Perhaps it was a clever political maneuver by Merlin, designed to unite the warring factions under a single, divinely appointed banner. It was during one of these grand tournaments, held near the stone to entertain the assembled nobility, that Arthur, still a young squire, arrived with Sir Ector and Kay. Kay, having forgotten his sword, asked Arthur to retrieve it from their lodging, but in the rush, Arthur found the lodging locked. Seeing the sword in the stone and not understanding its significance, or perhaps simply seeing it as a convenient replacement, he approached it with a simple, unburdened heart. Without effort, without strain, as if the sword were merely waiting for his touch, he drew it forth from the stone. The clang of steel against stone, though perhaps imagined, resonated through the stunned silence that followed. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Sir Ector and Kay, witnessing the impossible feat, were overcome with awe and disbelief. They recognized the prophecy, the impossible truth of what had just transpired. When Arthur, innocent of the profound implications of his act, presented the sword to Kay, his foster brother, Kay, recognizing its power, attempted to claim it as his own. But Sir Ector, a man of integrity, pressed Arthur for the truth, and upon hearing his simple, honest account, fell to his knees, acknowledging Arthur as his rightful king. The news spread like wildfire, igniting both hope and fierce opposition. Many of the established lords, proud and set in their ways, refused to accept a young, unknown boy, a mere squire, as their king. They demanded proof, challenging Arthur to repeat the feat. And so, again and again, Arthur would place the sword back into the stone. And again, he would draw it forth with effortless grace, while all others failed. This repeated demonstration of his unique connection to the sword, and thus to destiny, slowly began to chip away at the skepticism. The sheer impossibility of it, coupled with Merlin's powerful endorsements, and the growing desperation for a unified leader, eventually swayed enough hearts and minds. Thus, Arthur, the boy who was no one and everyone, was crowned King of Britain. His ascension was not merely a political event, it was a spiritual one, a moment when the ancient magic of the land seemed to align with human destiny. He established his court at Camelot, a place that would become synonymous with chivalry, justice, and the pursuit of noble ideals. While the exact location of Camelot remains a subject of scholarly debate, ranging from sites in Winchester to Cadbury Castle, its spiritual presence became the heart of Arthur's burgeoning kingdom. Under his reign, the fractured kingdoms began to coalesce. He gathered around him the finest knights, men of courage and honor, who would become known as the Knights of the Round Table. The Round Table itself, a symbol of equality among its members, where no one sat at the head, represented Arthur's vision of a kingdom built on shared ideals rather than hierarchical power. These knights, figures like Lancelot, Gawain, Percival, and Bors, swore oaths of loyalty to Arthur and to the ideals of chivalry, to protect the weak, uphold justice, and defend the innocent. Arthur's early reign was marked by relentless campaigns against the Saxon invaders. He proved himself a brilliant military strategist and a courageous warrior, leading his forces to numerous victories, pushing back the encroaching darkness and securing the borders of his burgeoning kingdom. These battles, though often bloody and arduous, were fought with a sense of purpose, fueled by the hope that Arthur had ignited in the hearts of his people. The legend speaks of 12 great battles, culminating in the decisive victory at Mount Badon, which, if it occurred, would have granted Britain a period of relative peace, perhaps in the early 6th century. This period of peace allowed Arthur to consolidate his power, establish laws, and foster a golden age of chivalry and culture. The establishment of Camelot became more than just a royal court. It became a beacon of hope and a center of learning and artistry. Bards sang tales of valor, scholars debated philosophy, and the ideals of courtly love began to flourish. For a time, Britain, under Arthur's steady hand, knew a unity and prosperity it had not experienced in centuries. Yet, even in this golden age, the seeds of future challenges were being sown, both from within and without. The very magic that had brought Arthur to power also hinted at deeper, more mystical quests that lay ahead, quests that would test the very fabric of his kingdom and the loyalty of his knights. The sword in the stone had proven his kingship, but the ultimate destiny of his reign and the true purpose of his chosen path remained yet to be revealed. The whispers of a sacred relic, a chalice of immense power, began to filter into the court, a quest that would eventually define the very essence of his legend. If you're enjoying this, liking and subscribing truly helps and is much appreciated. As the mists of war began to recede, a new dawn broke over the land, illuminating the nascent kingdom Arthur sought to build. His coronation, a solemn affair in the ancient city of Caerleon, had been more than a mere ritual. It was a covenant, a promise whispered between king and land, between ruler and ruled. The sword and the stone had proven his divine right, yet it was the wisdom of Merlin that guided his earthly hand, shaping the raw power of kingship into a vessel for justice and order. Merlin, with his eyes that seemed to hold the echoes of forgotten ages, understood that a kingdom was not merely a collection of lands and peoples, but a tapestry woven from ideals. And so, he counseled Arthur to seek not just loyal warriors, but men whose hearts beat with a higher purpose. These were to be the pillars of his reign, the champions of a new age, from the farthest reaches of the British Isles, and even from across the narrow seas, they came. Young men, their faces alight with ambition and courage, their hands calloused from sword and shield, but their spirits yearning for something more than mere conquest. They were drawn by the legend of Arthur, by the whispers of a king who sought to mend a broken world. Among the first to answer the call was Sir Lancelot, a knight from across the sea, whose prowess in battle was matched only by the nobility of his spirit. His arrival at Camelot was heralded by tales of his unmatched strength and unwavering loyalty. He quickly became Arthur's most trusted companion, his right hand in war and peace, embodying the very essence of chivalry. There was Sir Gawain, Arthur's own nephew, known for his unwavering honesty and fierce devotion, a man whose word was as strong as his steel. And Sir Percival, a youth of pure heart and humble origins, whose innocence and unwavering faith would later lead him down paths few dared to tread. These men, and many others, formed the core of what would become the most legendary fellowship in all of history, the Knights of the Round Table. The table itself was a stroke of Merlin's genius, a circular masterpiece crafted not just from wood and skill, but from a profound understanding of human nature. It had no head, no foot, signifying that all who sat around it were equal in stature, equal in voice. In an age where hierarchy was paramount, this was a revolutionary concept, a silent declaration that justice and counsel would prevail over arbitrary power. At this table, the ideals of chivalry began to take root and blossom. It was here that Arthur, guided by Merlin, articulated the code that would bind his knights: courage in battle, loyalty to the king, protection of the innocent, honor in all dealings, and truth above all else. They were to be not just warriors, but guardians of peace, arbiters of justice, and champions of the weak. Their oaths were sworn not just to Arthur, but to these very ideals, a sacred vow that transcended mere fealty. The early years of Arthur's reign were a period of immense growth and consolidation. The land, long fractured by petty squabbles and the lingering shadows of Roman decline, began to knit itself back together under his unifying vision. The knights, imbued with their new purpose, rode forth from Camelot, not to conquer, but to right wrongs. They defended villages from brigands, settled disputes between feuding lords, and protected pilgrims on their journeys. Each tale of their valor, each act of justice, wove itself into the fabric of the kingdom, strengthening Arthur's authority and inspiring hope among the common folk. One notable instance of their early work involved the restoration of order in the northern reaches, where a tyrannical baron had seized control of several prosperous lands, oppressing the local populace. Sir Lancelot, accompanied by Sir Gawain, rode to confront the baron. Instead of immediate combat, they first sought to negotiate, appealing to the baron's sense of honor and duty, reminding him of the new laws of the land under King Arthur. When reason failed, they engaged him in a series of challenges, not a full-scale war, but individual trials of skill and strength, designed to prove their superior virtue and martial prowess without unnecessary bloodshed. This approach, prioritizing justice and honorable conduct over brute force, became a hallmark of the Round Table. Yet, even as the kingdom flourished and the ideals of chivalry took root, there were undercurrents of dissent, whispers of doubt. Not all lords were willing to relinquish their old ways, their personal feuds, and their desire for unchecked power. Some viewed Arthur's new order as an imposition, a threat to their ancient rights and privileges. This tension between the old ways of fragmented power and the new vision of a unified, just kingdom would be a constant challenge throughout Arthur's reign. Historians still debate the precise historical basis for Camelot itself. Was it a specific fortress, a grand city that once stood in a now-forgotten location? Or was it an idealized concept, a symbolic representation of Arthur's just rule? Some scholars point to archaeological evidence of large, fortified settlements from the post-Roman period, like Cadbury Castle, as potential candidates, suggesting that the legend might have grown from a very impressive stronghold. Others argue that its description as a place of unparalleled beauty and peace makes it more of a mythical construct, a utopian vision of what a kingdom could be, rather than a literal place. Perhaps it was both, a real place elevated by the hopes and dreams of a people yearning for a golden age. The very concept of chivalry, too, was not born fully formed with Arthur. It evolved over centuries, drawing from various sources: Germanic warrior codes, Roman ideals of civic duty, and later, Christian morality. Arthur's court, however, is often credited with codifying and popularizing these ideals, transforming them from disparate customs into a coherent, moral, and ethical framework for knighthood. It was a conscious effort to civilize warfare, to imbue the warrior class with a sense of responsibility and moral obligation beyond mere conquest. One lesser-known detail from the Arthurian legends speaks to the early struggles of establishing this new order. Before the Round Table was fully established, there were instances where knights, still clinging to older, more brutal customs, would engage in duels over trivial slights or personal honor, often leading to unnecessary deaths. Merlin, it is said, once orchestrated a grand tournament where the rules were specifically designed to encourage skill and strategy over raw aggression, and where disputes were settled by impartial judges rather than by immediate combat. This event, though seemingly minor, was crucial in shifting the culture of the warrior class towards the more refined and honorable conduct that would define the Round Table. As the years turned into a decade, the fame of Arthur and his knights spread far and wide. The Round Table became a beacon of hope, a symbol of justice in a world often shrouded in darkness. Tales of their exploits, their courage, and their unwavering commitment to righteousness echoed through the valleys and over the hills, inspiring bards to sing new songs and common folk to dream of a better future. Yet even in this golden age, the seeds of future challenges were being sown. The very perfection Arthur sought to achieve was, perhaps, too grand for mortal men. The ideals of chivalry, while noble, placed an immense burden on those who swore to uphold them. The human heart, with its capacity for both great good and great failing, would inevitably be tested. The quest for justice, once a clear path, would soon intertwine with a deeper, more spiritual yearning, leading the knights on a journey that would challenge their very understanding of faith, honor, and purpose. The world was still a place of magic and mystery, and the whispers of ancient prophecies had not yet faded. Soon, a new quest would emerge, one that would test the very foundations of Camelot and send its greatest champions on a journey into the unknown, forever changing the destiny of the Round Table. The air, once thick with the clatter of arms and the murmur of earthly concerns, began to hum with a different kind of vibration. It was a subtle shift at first, like the faintest whisper carried on the wind, speaking of something beyond the tangible. Knights, their armor still bearing the dust of countless skirmishes, found their thoughts drifting from tales of valor and conquest to something more ethereal, more profound. A new longing stirred within them, a quiet ache for a purpose grander than any earthly king could bestow. This shift wasn't sudden. It was a slow, almost imperceptible unfolding, much like the first hesitant blush of dawn painting the eastern sky. It began not in grand pronouncements, but in hushed conversations around flickering hearths, in the quiet contemplation within monastic cells, and in the soulful melodies sung by wandering troubadours. The whispers spoke of a sacred vessel, a chalice of unparalleled holiness, said to possess miraculous powers. It was a vessel steeped in divinity, touched by the very hands of the divine, and its name, spoken with increasing reverence, was the Holy Grail. The precise origins of these murmurs are shrouded in the mists of time, a testament to how deeply the legend intertwined with the spiritual consciousness of the age. Some tales suggested its existence was revealed in visions to devout hermits, while others claimed it was carried to the west by ancient pilgrims returning from the Holy Land, their hearts alight with newfound faith. Regardless of its exact genesis, by the late 12th and early 13th centuries, the concept of the Grail had begun to weave itself inextricably into the tapestry of European thought, particularly within the burgeoning literary traditions. This period, often called the High Middle Ages, was a time of immense spiritual fervor, marked by the Crusades and the construction of magnificent cathedrals that soared towards the heavens, reflecting a collective yearning for the divine. The very notion of the Grail offered a compelling counterpoint to the often brutal realities of feudal life. While knights were bound by oaths of fealty and the pursuit of earthly glory, the Grail presented a quest of an entirely different nature, one for spiritual purity, for inner transformation, and for a connection to the sacred. It promised not land or riches, but enlightenment, healing, and perhaps even immortality. This profound spiritual yearning resonated deeply with the chivalric ideals that were simultaneously evolving. Chivalry, initially a code of conduct for warriors, began to incorporate virtues like honor, justice, and protection of the weak, and the Grail quest offered the ultimate expression of these higher ideals. One of the earliest and most influential literary works to give form to these nascent whispers was Chrétien de Troyes' Percival, The Story of the Grail, written around 1180. Though incomplete, Chrétien's narrative introduced the young, naive knight, Percival, who stumbles upon the mysterious Fisher King and witnesses a procession featuring a bleeding lance and, most significantly, a glowing, jewel-encrusted grail. Chrétien's Grail was not yet explicitly the chalice of Christ's Last Supper, but rather a wondrous, almost magical object. Yet his work planted the seed, igniting the imaginations of countless listeners and readers. It presented a world where the extraordinary was possible, where spiritual quests were as vital, if not more so, than earthly conquests. Following Chrétien, other poets and storytellers took up the thread, each adding new layers and interpretations to the evolving legend. Wolfram von Eschenbach, in his epic poem Percival, composed in the early 13th century, significantly expanded the Grail lore. Wolfram's Grail was a stone, fallen from heaven, guarded by a lineage of Grail kings, and sustained by a host of knights known as the Templeisen, a clear nod to the Knights Templar, who were prominent at the time. This shift, from a chalice to a stone, and the introduction of a dedicated order of guardians, illustrates how fluid and adaptable the legend was in its formative years. Historians still debate whether Wolfram's choice of a stone was a deliberate theological statement, perhaps distancing the Grail from purely Christian relics, or if it was simply a creative flourish that resonated with the mystical traditions of his era. Some scholars suggest it might have been influenced by Gnostic or Cathar beliefs, which were prevalent in parts of Europe during this period, though definitive proof remains elusive. Another pivotal text was Robert de Boron's Joseph d'Arimathie, written around 1200. It was de Boron who definitively linked the Grail to the Last Supper, stating that Joseph of Arimathea used the chalice to collect Christ's blood at the crucifixion. This narrative firmly established the Grail within Christian theology, transforming it from a magical object into the holiest of relics. De Boron's work provided a powerful origin story, imbuing the Grail with immense spiritual significance and making its pursuit a truly sacred endeavor. It was this version that largely solidified the Grail's identity in the collective consciousness, shaping how generations would perceive it. The circulation of these tales, initially through oral tradition and later through manuscripts copied by diligent scribes, created a profound sense of anticipation and wonder across the land. Knights who had previously sought glory on the battlefield now found themselves contemplating a different kind of battle, a spiritual one. The Grail quest became the ultimate expression of their vows, a chance to transcend earthly limitations and achieve a state of grace. It was a journey not just across physical landscapes, but into the depths of their own souls, demanding purity of heart, unwavering faith, and an unshakable moral compass. The concept of the Grail also resonated deeply with the monastic orders of the time. Monasteries, centers of learning and spiritual devotion, often served as repositories for ancient texts and esoteric knowledge. It is plausible that some of the earliest whispers of the Grail might have originated within these cloistered walls, perhaps from interpretations of apocryphal gospels or obscure mystical traditions. The Cistercian order, for instance, known for its austere piety and emphasis on spiritual purity, might have found the idea of a quest for a holy relic particularly appealing, aligning with their own pursuit of divine communion. The Grail, as it began to take shape in the collective imagination, was not merely an object. It was a symbol of ultimate truth, of divine presence, and of humanity's inherent capacity for redemption. It offered hope in a world often fraught with hardship and uncertainty. For a knight, embarking on the Grail quest meant forsaking worldly temptations, enduring trials, and confronting their own flaws. It was a pilgrimage of the soul, promising a transformation that transcended any earthly reward. Perhaps these early whispers of the Grail, carried on the wind and echoing in the halls of castles and abbeys, were a collective manifestation of a deeper societal need. As Europe emerged from the fragmentation of the early Middle Ages, there was a yearning for unifying narratives, for shared ideals that could bind disparate peoples together. The Grail, with its universal appeal and profound spiritual implications, offered just such a narrative. It transcended regional differences and political rivalries, offering a common pursuit that could unite even the most formidable of knights. The stories of the Grail also served as powerful moral allegories. They explored themes of sin and redemption, temptation and perseverance, the perils of pride, and the virtues of humility. Knights who embarked on the quest often faced moral dilemmas, testing their resolve and forcing them to confront their inner demons. The failures of like Sir Lancelot, whose earthly love for Queen Guinevere ultimately prevented him from achieving the Grail, served as cautionary tales, emphasizing the absolute purity required for success. His story, deeply woven into the Arthurian cycle, highlights the tension between courtly love and spiritual devotion, a common theme in medieval literature. The very idea of a quest itself was deeply ingrained in the medieval psyche. Pilgrimages to holy sites were common, and crusades to the Holy Land were undertaken by thousands. The Grail quest, however, elevated this concept to an entirely new level. It was a journey not to a fixed geographical location, but to a spiritual state, a journey inward as much as outward. The path to the Grail was not always clear, often requiring intuition, divine guidance, and an unwavering commitment to a higher purpose. The impact of these early Grail narratives was profound and far-reaching. They not only shaped the literary landscape of the Middle Ages, but also influenced the very ideals of chivalry and knighthood. The pursuit of the Grail became the ultimate aspiration, a spiritual pinnacle that surpassed all earthly achievements. It imbued the lives of knights with a sense of cosmic significance, transforming their earthly battles into steps on a grander, more divine journey. As the 13th century dawned, the whispers of the Grail had grown into a resounding chorus. The legend had taken root, intertwining with the Arthurian myths and the burgeoning concept of Camelot as a utopian kingdom. The Round Table, initially a symbol of equality among knights, now found its ultimate purpose in the collective pursuit of the Holy Grail. The quest had begun, not with a single decree, but with the quiet stirring of a spiritual longing that would forever alter the course of legend and inspire generations to come. The stage was set for the greatest adventure of all, a journey not for earthly spoils, but for the very essence of the divine. The air within the castle walls, once thick with the clatter of armor and the boisterous laughter of knights began to shift. A subtle, almost imperceptible change, like the first breath of autumn after a long summer, settled over Camelot. The quest for the Holy Grail, though sworn by all, remained an elusive whisper, a distant star in the vast firmament of their ambitions. Many had ridden forth, their banners snapping in the wind, their hearts brimming with courage, only to return with tales of hardship, of enchanted forests and treacherous bogs, but never of the sacred vessel itself. Some had vanished entirely, swallowed by the mists of legend, their fates forever entwined with the mysteries they pursued. It was into this atmosphere of hopeful weariness that a new presence arrived, heralded not by trumpets or fanfare, but by a quiet dignity that seemed to precede him. He was a youth, barely more than a boy, yet there was an ancient wisdom in his eyes, a serene composure that set him apart. His armor, though gleaming, bore no heraldry, no marks of lineage, and his shield was as white as freshly fallen snow, utterly unblemished. This was Sir Galahad, and his arrival was not by chance, but by prophecy. Merlin, the aged enchanter whose wisdom had guided Arthur for so long, had foreseen this moment. He spoke of a knight whose purity of heart would surpass all others, a soul so untainted that only he could behold the Grail. This prophecy had been etched into the very fabric of Camelot's destiny, whispered in the rustling leaves of ancient trees and carried on the wind from distant shores. The Round Table itself, a symbol of equality and fellowship, held a vacant seat, the siege perilous, reserved for the one destined to achieve the ultimate quest. Many had attempted to claim it, drawn by ambition or a misguided sense of worthiness. But each had been met with a swift and terrible fate, consumed by an unseen fire, a testament to the seat's sacred nature. Galahad approached the great hall, his steps light, almost ethereal. As he drew near the Siege Perilous, a golden inscription, previously unseen, shimmered into existence upon its back. "This is the seat of Galahad." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled knights. Lancelot, his father, watched with a mixture of awe and humble recognition. For he knew the prophecy spoke of his son, born of Elaine, the daughter of King Pelles, the keeper of the Grail. It was a lineage both blessed and burdened, for Lancelot's own heart, though noble, carried the weight of past transgressions, rendering him, despite his immense prowess, ultimately unworthy of the Grail's full revelation. The moment Galahad settled into the Siege Perilous, a profound silence descended upon the hall. A beam of light, soft and pure, seemed to emanate from him, filling the space with an almost palpable sense of peace. It was as if the very air had been cleansed, purified by his presence. This was not a mere knight. This was the chosen one, the vessel through whom the divine would manifest. The next morning, as the knights gathered for Mass, a vision appeared before them, suspended in the air above the altar. It was the Holy Grail, veiled in white samite, carried by 4 angels. A blinding light emanated from it, and a voice, clear and resonant, spoke to them, urging them to embark on the quest, not for glory or earthly reward, but for the spiritual enlightenment it offered. The Grail, however, remained veiled, its true form hidden, for even in its manifestation, it demanded a deeper seeking, a more profound understanding. This initial glimpse, fleeting as it was, ignited a renewed fervor among the knights. The quest was no longer a vague ideal, but a tangible, if still mysterious, reality. Many, inspired by Galahad's purity and the divine vision, rededicated themselves to the spiritual path. Yet even among them, there were those who pursued the Grail with a worldly ambition, seeking its power rather than its grace, a distinction that would prove crucial in their individual journeys. Galahad, however, understood the true nature of the quest. For him, it was not a test of strength or cunning, but a pilgrimage of the soul. He rode forth with Sir Percival and Sir Bors, two knights whose hearts, though not as perfectly pure as his own, were nonetheless aligned with the Grail's spiritual essence. Percival, who had once lived a simple, almost wild life, had undergone a profound transformation, his innocence now tempered by wisdom. Bors, a steadfast and devout knight, was known for his unwavering faith and moral rectitude. Their journey together would be a testament to the diverse paths one could take towards spiritual enlightenment, each offering its own lessons and trials. Their path led them through lands both familiar and forgotten, through ancient forests where sunlight dappled through leaves like stained glass, and over rolling hills where the wind whispered secrets of forgotten ages. Unlike many knights who sought adventure and combat, Galahad and his companions were guided by a different compass, an inner knowing, a spiritual intuition that drew them towards places of sanctity and revelation. They encountered hermits living in secluded caves, their lives devoted to prayer and contemplation, who offered cryptic guidance and blessings. They visited ruined chapels, their stones still echoing with ancient hymns, where they found solace and renewed purpose. One notable encounter occurred at the Castle of Maidens, a fortress held captive by 7 wicked knights. This was not a battle of brute force, but a spiritual cleansing. Galahad, with his unparalleled purity, was able to break the enchantment that held the castle, freeing its inhabitants and restoring its sanctity. It was a symbolic victory, demonstrating that the true power of the Grail lay not in physical might, but in moral righteousness and spiritual purity. This particular episode highlights a key theme in the Grail narratives: the idea that the quest is not merely about finding a physical object, but about internal transformation and the triumph of good over evil, often through spiritual rather than martial means. As their journey continued, the trials they faced became less about external adversaries and more about internal struggles. They encountered temptations, illusions, and moments of profound doubt, designed to test their resolve and their commitment to the sacred quest. For Percival, it was a beautiful temptress, a devil in disguise, who sought to lure him away from his vows. He nearly succumbed, but a sudden flash of light, a reminder of his sacred purpose, allowed him to resist. For Bors, it was a choice between saving his brother, Lionel, who had fallen into sin, and continuing the quest. He chose the quest, trusting in divine providence, and later found his brother saved through a miracle, a testament to the power of unwavering faith. Galahad, however, seemed almost impervious to such temptations. His heart was so completely dedicated to the divine that worldly allure held no sway over him. He moved through the world with an unshakable inner peace, his gaze fixed on the ultimate prize. This unwavering focus, this profound purity, is what sets him apart from even the most virtuous of his fellow knights. It is why he is often depicted as an almost ethereal figure, less a man and more a living embodiment of spiritual perfection. The narrative of Galahad's purity, while central to the Grail quest, has also been a point of scholarly discussion. Some historians and literary critics suggest that Galahad, as a character, might have been introduced later into the Arthurian cycle, perhaps to imbue the quest with a more overtly Christian and spiritual dimension, contrasting with the earlier, more chivalric and earthly pursuits of knights like Lancelot. The early Welsh and French romances, for instance, often featured a more ambiguous and less overtly moralistic port. Rail of the Grail, sometimes linking it to ancient Celtic cauldrons of plenty or regeneration. The emphasis on Galahad's absolute purity, therefore, could be seen as a deliberate theological shift, aiming to elevate the Grail quest to the highest spiritual plane, aligning it more closely with monastic ideals of asceticism and devotion. This shift transformed the Grail from a magical artifact into a symbol of divine grace, accessible only through a life of unparalleled virtue. Indeed, the very concept of purity in the medieval context was multifaceted, encompassing not just chastity, but also freedom from sin, unwavering faith, and a complete dedication to God. Galahad embodied all these virtues to an almost superhuman degree. His journey was less about seeking and more about being. He didn't just search for the Grail. He was, in a sense, a living manifestation of its ideals. Their travels eventually led them to the castle of Corbenique, the ancient seat of the Grail king, Pellis. This was the spiritual heart of the Grail mysteries, a place shrouded in enchantment and divine presence. Here, the Grail was kept, and here the true revelations would unfold. The castle itself was a place of paradox, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden, accessible only to those deemed worthy. Its walls, perhaps, whispered stories to the stars, echoing with centuries of prayer and longing. Upon entering Corbenique, Galahad, Percival, and Bors were led to a sacred chamber where the Holy Grail, now unveiled, rested upon a table. Its radiance filled the room, not with a harsh, blinding light, but with a soft, warm glow that seemed to penetrate the very soul. It was here that they witnessed the true miracle of the Grail. A figure appeared before them, described as Joseph of Arimathea, the one who had brought the Grail to Britain. He performed a mass, and then the Grail itself offered them a sacred communion, a spiritual sustenance that transcended earthly food. For Galahad, this was the culmination of his earthly journey. He had not merely found the Grail, he had communed with it, absorbed its divine essence. The experience was so profound, so utterly transcendent, that he felt his earthly tether begin to loosen. He prayed to be released from his mortal coil, to ascend to the heavenly realms, his purpose fulfilled. And in that moment, his prayer was granted. With a final, serene breath, Galahad passed from the world, his soul carried aloft by angels, the Holy Grail ascending with him, taken back to the heavens, no longer to be seen by mortal eyes. Percival and Bors, though heartbroken by the loss of their pure companion, understood the sacred nature of his departure. They had witnessed the ultimate achievement of the quest, the union of a pure soul with the divine. Their own journeys continued for a time, serving as living testaments to the Grail's power and the spiritual lessons they had learned. Percival eventually became a hermit, living a life of contemplation, while Bors returned to Camelot, carrying the tale of Galahad's triumph and the Grail's ascension, a bittersweet testament to the quest's ultimate spiritual victory. The departure of the Grail with Galahad marked the end of an era for Camelot. The sacred vessel, which had inspired so much seeking and so many trials, was no longer a tangible presence. Its absence left a void, a spiritual longing that no earthly glory could fill. For Arthur and his remaining knights, the world seemed a little less bright, a little less certain. The quest had revealed the highest ideals of chivalry and faith. But it had also highlighted the imperfections of the mortal world. The Grail, in its brief manifestation and subsequent withdrawal, had served its purpose to elevate, to purify, and ultimately to transcend. Its legacy would forever be etched into the heart of the Arthurian legends, a reminder that the greatest treasures are not found in gold or power, but in the purity of the human spirit and the realm, and less pursuit of divine grace. The air grew thin, the light of the setting sun casting long, skeletal shadows across a landscape that seemed to sigh with ancient weariness. It was here, at the edge of what felt like the known world, that the Knights of the Round Table, once a glittering constellation in Camelot's halls, began to scatter like embers from a dying fire. Each, driven by the singular burning image of the Grail, chose a path, not with a flourish of trumpets, but with a quiet, almost hesitant step into the vast, silent unknown. The unity of their quest, so grand in conception, now dissolved into a multitude of solitary pilgrimages, each knight carrying only the weight of his own heart and the faint echo of Merlin's enigmatic words. Sir Lancelot, his heart a tangle of earthly love and divine longing, found himself drawn to a path that wound through desolate moors, where the wind carried the scent of damp earth and forgotten things. He sought not merely the Grail, but absolution, a cleansing of the soul that felt perpetually stained by his devotion to Queen Guinevere. His journey was marked by a profound internal struggle, a dialogue between the knight he was and the knight he yearned to be. He encountered hermits living in caves, their eyes holding the stillness of deep wells, and spent nights beneath skies so vast and star-dusted they seemed to mock the smallness of his earthly woes. One such night, near a crumbling, nameless chapel, he wrestled with a spectral adversary, not of flesh and blood, but of doubt and regret, a manifestation of his own unworthiness. This vision, as recounted in some of the earlier French romances, left him physically drained but spiritually awakened, understanding that the true battle was not with external foes, but with the shadows within himself. Sir Percival, younger and perhaps less burdened by the world's complexities, followed a path that led him through forests so ancient their trees seemed to remember the dawn of time. His trials were often tests of compassion and humility, rather than overt combat. He encountered villagers suffering from mysterious ailments, their fields barren, their spirits broken. Unlike some of his more seasoned companions, Percival's innocence allowed him to see the world not through a veil of cynicism, but with a clear, unblemished gaze. He offered comfort, shared his meager provisions, and listened with an open heart. It was said that in one isolated valley, he came upon a weeping maiden beside a dried-up spring. Where others might have sought a magical solution, Percival simply sat with her, sharing her sorrow, and in that act of pure empathy, the spring miraculously began to flow again, a gentle reminder that the Grail's power often manifested through acts of selfless love. This particular motif, of the land mirroring the spiritual health of its inhabitants, is a recurring theme in many Grail narratives, hinting at a profound connection between human virtue and the natural world. Sir Bors, ever the steadfast and pious, found his journey marked by temptations of a different kind. He traversed barren plains where illusions shimmered in the heat, promising comfort, glory, or even the Grail itself, only to dissolve into dust upon approach. His unwavering faith, however, served as an unyielding compass. He faced demands to abandon his vows, to compromise his principles for worldly gain or fleeting pleasure. In one widely recounted episode, he was confronted by a beautiful woman who claimed to be the Grail's guardian, offering him unparalleled power if he would only renounce his chastity. Bors, though sorely tested, recognized the deceit, his devotion to purity, proving a stronger shield than any armor. His trials were less about physical prowess and more about the endurance of the spirit, a testament to his unshakable moral core. Historians and literary scholars still debate the precise origins of these temptation narratives within the Grail cycle. Some argue they reflect monastic ideas prevalent in the 12th and 13th centuries, while others suggest they are allegories for the internal struggles of faith common to all believers, regardless of their vows. Galahad, however, walked a path distinct from all others. His journey, if it could even be called that, seemed less a quest and more a divine procession. The land itself seemed to part for him, offering passage where others found only impassable barriers. He encountered fewer overt trials, for his purity was so absolute that temptation seemed to recoil from him, and physical obstacles yielded to his mere presence. His trials were often subtle, moments of profound spiritual insight, or encounters with figures who seemed to guide him with whispered truths. It was as if the Grail itself was drawing him, not merely waiting to be found. He healed the sick with a touch, brought solace to the despairing with a word, and his very presence seemed to purify the blighted lands he passed through. This almost effortless progress, in stark contrast to the struggles of his companions, underscores his role as the chosen one, the knight destined to achieve the Grail. The landscape itself became a character in their individual sagas, a desolate, often blighted land, known as the Wasteland in many traditions. This barrenness was not merely physical, it was a spiritual reflection of the kingdom's decay, a consequence of the Fischl king's wound and the absence of the Grail's healing power. The knights often found themselves in places where rivers ran dry, trees withered, and the air hung heavy with a sense of ancient sorrow. They slept in abandoned ruins, their dreams haunted by the cries of unseen creatures or the whispers of forgotten tragedies. These places, devoid of life, served as stark backdrops for their internal battles, amplifying their sense of isolation and forcing them to confront their deepest fears and failings. The very ground they trod seemed to whisper stories of past glories and present despair, a constant reminder of the urgent need for the Grail's restoration. One of the more obscure details found in some versions of the legend describes how the knights occasionally came across strange, ephemeral lights in the distance. Not stars, nor fires, but shimmering, almost liquid glows that would vanish upon approach. These were sometimes interpreted as fleeting glimpses of the Grail's aura, or perhaps the lingering presence of ancient, unseen spirits connected to the land's suffering. They served as tantalizing, frustrating beacons, forever just out of reach, mirroring the elusive nature of their ultimate goal. The knights' encounters were not always solitary. Sometimes, their paths would briefly intersect, 2 or 3 knights meeting by chance at a crossroads or a ruined hermitage. These meetings were often brief, marked by a shared understanding of their arduous journeys, a silent acknowledgement of the burdens each carried. They would share news, offer encouragement, and then, with a nod, depart once more into their separate solitudes. These fleeting reunions highlighted the individual nature of their quests. Even as they were bound by a common purpose, it was in these moments that the true measure of their resolve was seen, not in grand pronouncements, but in the quiet determination to continue, despite the overwhelming odds and the profound loneliness of their paths. The spiritual trials were often more grueling than any physical combat. The knights faced visions that tested their faith, their humility, and their commitment to their vows. They were forced to confront their own sins, their pride, their doubts, and their human frailties. For Lancelot, this meant wrestling with his love for Guinevere. For Percival, it was learning the true meaning of compassion. For Bors, it was resisting the allure of worldly power. Galahad, uniquely, seemed to transcend these struggles, his purity acting as a shield, allowing him to perceive the divine truths that remained veiled to others. His trials were more about understanding and acceptance, a gradual unveiling of the Grail's mysteries, rather than a struggle against temptation. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the knights became gaunt, their armor dulled by dust and rain, their faces etched with weariness and spiritual intensity. They had shed the trappings of Camelot, the courtly splendor replaced by the stark realities of the wilderness. Their quest had stripped them bare, revealing not just their strengths, but their vulnerabilities, their humanity. They were no longer merely knights of the Round Table. They were pilgrims, seekers, their lives irrevocably altered by the relentless pursuit of the divine. The Grail, though still unseen, had already begun its transformative work, reshaping their souls in the crucible of the Wasteland. Each step taken, each trial endured, was a prayer, a silent offering in the hope of finding that which transcended all earthly understanding. The very air around them seemed to hum with an unspoken tension, as if the land itself held its breath, awaiting the moment when one of these weary yet resolute souls might finally draw near to the sacred object, and perhaps begin to heal the world. The morning mist still clung to the ancient oaks as Percival rode away from the castle, its grand halls now seeming to mock his recent failures. A profound sense of shame, heavy as the chainmail he wore, settled upon him. He had seen the Grail, stood in its presence, and yet in his youthful arrogance and unthinking adherence to the rules of chivalry, he had failed to ask the crucial question. The memory of the maimed king's suffering, the desolate land, and the silent, shimmering cup haunted him. He was no longer the naive boy who had stumbled into Arthur's court, nor the eager knight seeking glory. This failure, unlike any battle lost, was a wound to his very soul, a revelation of his own deep-seated ignorance. His journey became a solitary penance. He rode for days, then weeks, through forests where the sunlight dappled the leaves like scattered gold, and across plains where the wind whispered ancient secrets. He sought no inns, partook of no feasts, his sustenance meager, his companions only his horse and the gnawing regret within him. He avoided other knights, for their cheerful camaraderie felt like a judgment, and their tales of valor a stark contrast to his own ignominious silence at the Grail Castle. He began to truly see the world around him, not as a backdrop for heroic deeds, but as a living, breathing tapestry of interconnectedness. He noticed the delicate fragility of a spider's web, shimmering with dew, the patient unfolding of a fern, the quiet determination of a river carving its path through stone. These small observations, once overlooked in his pursuit of grandeur, now spoke to him of a deeper order, a subtle harmony he had been blind to. One afternoon, as a sudden downpour turned the forest floor into a slick, muddy track, he sought shelter beneath a massive, gnarled oak. A faint whimpering drew his attention, and he discovered a small, wounded bird, its wing broken, shivering in the cold rain. His first instinct, honed by years of nightly training, was to move on, to conserve his own strength. But the sight of its vulnerability, so mirrored in his own recent helplessness, stirred something new within him. He carefully cupped the tiny creature in his gauntleted hands, its frail warmth a surprising comfort. He fashioned a makeshift splint from a twig and a strip of linen torn from his own tunic, then sheltered it close to his body until the rain subsided. This simple act of compassion, devoid of any expectation of reward or glory, brought a quiet satisfaction, a sense of rightness that had eluded him even in his triumphs. His path eventually led him to a hermitage, a small, weathered stone dwelling nestled deep within a secluded valley. An old hermit, his face lined with years and wisdom, greeted him with a gentle gaze that seemed to penetrate his very being. Percival, unburdened by his usual reticence, confessed his failure at the Grail Castle, his voice thick with anguish. The hermit listened patiently, his eyes never leaving Percival's face. When Percival finished, the hermit spoke, his voice soft but resonant. "You sought the Grail, young knight, with the heart of a warrior, but not yet with the soul of a seeker. The questions you failed to ask were not merely about the king's suffering, but about your own. The Grail reveals not only the divine, but the truth within oneself." The hermit then spoke of humility, of the quiet strength found in acknowledging one's limitations, and of compassion, the true measure of a knight's heart. He taught Percival about the spiritual significance of fasting and prayer, not as acts of self-denial, but as ways to purify the spirit and open oneself to higher understanding. He explained that the Grail was not merely a physical object, but a spiritual vessel, a symbol of divine grace that could only be perceived by a pure and selfless heart. This period of tutelage, which stretched over many months, was a profound transformation for Percival. He shed his outward armor, both literally and figuratively, and began to cultivate an inner strength rooted in self-awareness and empathy. He learned to meditate, to quiet the restless clamor of his thoughts, and to listen to the subtle promptings of his conscience. During this time, he also heard tales of other knights who had sought the Grail, some with noble intentions, others driven by ambition or curiosity. One such tale, often whispered among the hermit's occasional visitors, concerned a knight named Galahad, a figure of almost mythical purity, said to be destined for the Grail quest from birth. Historians still debate the precise origins of the Galahad character within the Grail legends, with some suggesting he was a later addition, perhaps introduced to emphasize a more overtly Christian interpretation of the quest, while others argue he was an integral part of earlier, unrecorded oral traditions. This scholarly dispute highlights the evolving nature of these medieval narratives, shaped and reshaped by the values and beliefs of successive generations. Percival, though he had not yet met Galahad, felt a strange connection to this fabled knight, a sense of shared purpose, albeit one he was only now beginning to truly grasp. The hermit encouraged Percival to understand that true chivalry was not about striking down foes, but about uplifting the fallen, not about seeking glory, but about serving a higher purpose. He taught him that the desolate land, the wasteland as it was often called, was not just a physical place, but a reflection of the spiritual barrenness that afflicted humanity, a barrenness that could only be healed by compassion and self-sacrifice. One day, as Percival helped the hermit tend his small garden, cultivating the meager crops that sustained them, a traveler arrived, exhausted and distraught. He spoke of a terrible plague sweeping through the nearby villages, leaving death and despair in its wake. The hermit, despite his advanced age, immediately prepared to go, his commitment to service unwavering. Percival, without a moment's hesitation, offered to accompany him. This was not a quest for fame or a challenge to overcome, but a simple act of selfless aid. For weeks, they traveled from village to village, ministering to the sick, comforting the dying, and burying the dead. Percival, who had once recoiled from the sight of suffering, now faced it with quiet resolve. His hands, once skilled only in wielding a sword, now gentle in tending to fevered brows and bandaging wounds. He saw the raw, unvarnished reality of human pain and resilience, and in helping others, he found a profound sense of purpose that transcended any personal ambition. It was during this period of humble service that Percival began to truly understand the nature of the Grail. It was not a magical artifact that would instantly grant wishes or power, but a symbol of divine love and boundless compassion. The healing of the land, he realized, was intrinsically linked to the healing of the human spirit. The maimed king's suffering was not just his own, but a reflection of the collective suffering of humanity, a suffering that could only be alleviated through acts of selfless love and understanding. One evening, as he sat by a flickering fire in a makeshift camp, exhausted but content, he recalled a specific detail from this first encounter with the Grail. Amidst the shimmering light and the solemn procession, he had seen, briefly, a vision of a bleeding lance, held by a youth, its drops falling into the Grail. This image, so vivid yet so fleeting, had haunted him. The hermit had later explained that this was the lance of Longinus, the spear that had pierced Christ's side on the cross, another powerful symbol of sacrifice and redemption. The Grail, then, was not just about a king's illness, but about the very essence of spiritual healing, a healing that required empathy, sacrifice, and an open heart. His journey of self-discovery had transformed him. The arrogant, unthinking knight had been replaced by a man of profound humility and deep compassion. He no longer sought external validation or material glory. His true quest had become an internal one, a continuous striving for purity of heart and understanding. He knew now that the path to the Grail was not a straight line, but a winding journey through the landscape of one's own soul, a journey marked by introspection, forgiveness, and selfless service. The question he had failed to ask then, he now carried within him, not as a burden, but as a guiding light. Whom does the Grail serve? And the answer, he now understood, was not a simple one, but a profound truth that encompassed all of humanity, all of creation. Perhaps these quiet moments of reflection under the vast, star-strewn sky were the truest encounters with the divine, a gentle whisper of understanding that transcended words and visions. The air in Camelot, once vibrant with the clinking of armor and the joyous laughter of knights, began to thicken with an unspoken tension, a subtle discord that resonated even in the quietest corners of the castle. The Holy Grail, a beacon of divine promise, had also cast a long shadow, revealing the imperfections and secret burdens that lay hidden beneath the shining exteriors of Arthur's finest. Among them, none felt this weight more acutely than Sir Lancelot, the very paragon of chivalry, whose strength and courage had long been the envy of all. Lancelot, the first knight of the Round Table, had always moved with an effortless grace, his sword arm unmatched, his loyalty to Arthur seemingly unshakable. Yet beneath this polished facade, a different narrative was unfolding, one woven from threads of forbidden love and earthly desire. His heart, though pledged to the ideals of Camelot, was irrevocably tethered to Queen Guinevere, a bond that, while passionate and profound, stood in direct opposition to the spiritual purity demanded by the Grail quest. He had set forth with the other knights, his armor gleaming, his spirit initially buoyed by the collective hope. But as the journey unfolded and the mystical signs and visions began to manifest, Lancelot found himself increasingly isolated, not by distance, but by an internal chasm. The divine light that illuminated the path for others seemed to dim for him, or perhaps it merely cast his own shadows into starker relief. He encountered wonders, certainly, ancient hermitages nestled in forgotten valleys, shimmering springs rumored to possess healing properties, and wise hermits whose eyes held the wisdom of ages. Yet each encounter, rather than drawing him closer to the Grail, seemed to amplify his sense of unworthiness. One evening, after days of fruitless searching through a dense, mist-shrouded forest, Lancelot sought refuge in a small, dilapidated chapel, its stones crumbling, its wooden altar warped with time. He knelt, not in the confident posture of a knight seeking divine favor, but in a posture of profound humility and despair. As he prayed, or perhaps merely contemplated his predicament, a vision appeared to him, not of the Grail itself, but of an angelic host. Their forms shimmering with an ethereal light, they spoke, their voices like the gentle murmur of a distant stream, yet their message was clear and cutting. Lancelot, thou art a knight of great prowess and noble heart, but thy sins weigh heavily upon thee. Thou hast loved earthly things more than heavenly, and therefore the Grail remains beyond thy reach. This vision, rather than offering comfort, deepened his spiritual anguish. He understood, with a clarity that pierced through his pride, that his profound attachment to Guinevere, while a source of immense joy and solace in his earthly life, was the very impediment to his spiritual ascent. The Grail demanded an absolute purity of heart, a singular devotion to the divine, unblemished by worldly affections. Lancelot, for all his strength, could not sever this bond. He was caught between two worlds, the earthly realm where his love flourished, and the spiritual realm where his love was deemed a transgression. Historians and scholars have long debated the precise nature of Lancelot's sin in the Arthurian legends. Was it merely the act of adultery, a breach of feudal loyalty and religious law? Or was it, as some interpretations suggest, a deeper spiritual flaw, an inability to transcend human desire for a higher divine purpose? The texts themselves, evolving over centuries from early Welsh tales to the more elaborate French romances of the 12th and 13th centuries, offer varying degrees of emphasis. In Chrétien de Troyes' Lancelot, the Knight of the Cart, for instance, the focus is more on the courtly love aspect, while later prose cycles, like the Vulgate cycle, circa 1215 to 1235, heavily emphasize the spiritual dimension and Lancelot's unworthiness foe, the Grail due to his illicit affair. This shift reflects the changing cultural and religious sensibilities of medieval Europe, where the ideals of chivalry began to intertwine more explicitly with Christian morality. Lancelot continued his quest, not with the fervent hope of discovery, but with a heavy heart, almost as a penance. He witnessed other knights, those less renowned than himself, experience moments of profound spiritual insight. He heard tales of Sir Galahad, his own son, who moved through the world with an almost ethereal grace, untouched by earthly temptation, seemingly destined for the Grail. This contrast between his own burdened soul and Galahad's pure spirit was a constant, gnawing reminder of his own limitations. One lesser-known detail from some versions of the legend describes Lancelot's encounter with a bridge made of a single, razor-sharp sword, spanning a chasm of boiling water. This sword bridge was said to be a test of faith and purity. While Lancelot, with his immense physical prowess, managed to cross it, the journey was agonizing, leaving him wounded and bleeding. This episode is often interpreted symbolically. Even his great physical strength and courage could not spare him from the pain and suffering caused by his spiritual impurities. He could overcome physical obstacles, but the inner wounds remained. His journey became less about finding the Grail and more about confronting himself. He battled not only external foes, but also the inner demons of regret and longing. He longed for Guinevere, for the comfort of her presence, even as he knew this longing was his undoing in the spiritual quest. He saw visions of the Grail, sometimes shimmering just beyond his grasp, sometimes veiled by a mist, always retreating as he approached, a tantalizing promise, forever out of reach. These visions were not meant to mock him, but to illustrate the profound distance between his current state and the required purity. The Grail, in its mysterious wisdom, seemed to reveal each knight's true nature, not through judgment, but through reflection. For Lancelot, it reflected his deepest attachments, his inability to fully surrender to the divine. He was a man divided, his soul pulled between the earthly and the heavenly. And in that division, he found himself unable to achieve the ultimate spiritual communion. He returned to Camelot eventually, not with the Grail, but with a profound and somber understanding of himself. The light in his eyes, once so bright with youthful vigor, was now tinged with a melancholic wisdom. He carried the weight of his unworthiness, a burden heavier than any armor. His prowess remained, his skill with a sword undiminished, but the inner radiance that had once defined him seemed to have faded, replaced by a quiet sorrow. His failure to attain the Grail, however, was not an end, but a transformation. It marked a pivotal moment in his character arc, forcing him to confront the consequences of his choices. It led him down a path of increasing introspection and eventually profound repentance. While he would never hold the Holy Grail, his journey of self-discovery and the painful lessons learned became a different kind of treasure, shaping the man he would become in the twilight years of Camelot. His struggle served as a poignant counterpoint to the triumphs of others, a reminder that even the greatest among us are fallible, and that the path to spiritual enlightenment is often paved with self-confrontation and humility. The Grail, in its silent wisdom, had revealed not only the worthy, but also the profound complexities of the human heart. The journey pressed on, each step deeper into a land that seemed to hold its breath, awaiting a change. The vibrant greens of the spring forests had given way to a muted palette, the air thick with an unspoken sorrow. Rivers flowed sluggishly, their banks often barren, and the once bustling villages they passed now stood eerily quiet, their inhabitants moving with a weary resignation. It was as if the very lifeblood of the realm had begun to ebb, leaving behind a pervasive sense of desolation. This was the Wasteland, a landscape mirroring the spiritual decay that had taken root, a decay intimately tied to the suffering of its king. It was Percival, ever the earnest and pure-hearted, who first truly sensed the profound malaise that afflicted this place. He had grown accustomed to the boisterous camaraderie of the knights, the clang of armor, and the spirited tales around the campfire. But here, the silence was profound, broken only by the mournful cry of a distant bird or the rustle of dry leaves underfoot. He found himself thinking of his mother, of the simple, unblemished world he had left behind, and a quiet ache settled in his heart. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and faded orange, the knights stumbled upon a small, isolated castle. It was not the grand, imposing fortress one might expect of a king, but rather a modest, almost melancholic structure, its stones weathered and its banners drooping. A single flickering light emanated from a high window, a beacon in the encroaching gloom. As they approached, a hush fell over them, a sense of profound solemnity descending like a shroud. They were met by an old, somber retainer, who without much ceremony led them through dimly lit corridors, the air growing heavier with each step, carrying the faint scent of herbs and illness. Finally, they were ushered into a chamber where upon a simple bed lay a man of advanced years. His face was etched with pain, his eyes clouded with a deep, abiding sorrow. This was the Fisher King, the guardian of the Grail, and his suffering was palpable, a wound that seemed to bleed not just within him, but into the very fabric of the land he ruled. The legend spoke of a terrible wound, a grievous injury sustained by the king, perhaps in battle, perhaps through some mystical accident. Some tales whispered of a spear, others of a curse, but all agreed on the profound nature of his affliction. This wound, it was said, refused to heal, causing him perpetual agony and rendering him unable to move from his bed. And as the king suffered, so too did his kingdom. The rivers ceased to flow, the crops withered, the animals fled, and the people languished in despair. It was a symbiotic relationship, a spiritual malady manifesting as physical decay, a testament to the profound interconnectedness of ruler and realm. Percival, ever observant, noticed the king's hands, thin and trembling, resting on a worn blanket. He saw the faint sheen of sweat on his brow, the shallow, labored breaths. He felt a profound pity, a stirring of compassion that went beyond mere courtesy. He remembered the admonitions of his mother, the simple lessons of kindness and empathy she had instilled. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with unspoken questions. The knights, accustomed to the directness of battle and the clarity of a quest, found themselves in a realm of deep mystery and subtle suffering. They had come seeking the Grail, a tangible object, but now they were confronted with a living embodiment of its absence, a world yearning for healing. Sir Galahad, his gaze unwavering, approached the king's bedside. There was a quiet strength about him, a purity that seemed to cut through the oppressive air. He did not speak, but simply stood, his presence a silent offering of solace. Lancelot, ever the pragmatic warrior, felt a pang of unease. This was a battle he could not fight with a sword, a wound no balm could heal. He had faced dragons and armies, but this silent, pervasive suffering was a foe unlike any he had known. The king, with great effort, raised a hand, beckoning them closer. His voice, when he spoke, was a mere whisper, raspy and frail. He spoke of his burden, of the unceasing pain, and of the land's decline. He did not ask for help directly, but his words painted a vivid picture of a world on the brink, a world that desperately needed the Grail's restorative power. He spoke of the sacred vessel, not as a mere relic, but as a living fount of grace, capable of mending not only his body, but the very soul of the land. One of the lesser-known details of the Fisher King's story is the subtle connection to ancient fertility rites. While the Grail narratives are deeply Christianized, some scholars point to the echoes of pre-Christian myths, where the health and virility of the king were directly linked to the fertility of the land. The wounded king, unable to procreate or ensure the land's bounty, is a motif found in various cultures, suggesting a deeper archetypal resonance to the Grail story. Perhaps the suffering of the Fisher King was not just a personal affliction, but a symbolic representation of a world that had lost its connection to its sacred source, its vital energy. The knights stayed at the castle for a time, observing the king's slow decline and the pervasive gloom that clung to the very stones. They learned of the Grail's presence within the castle, yet its power remained inaccessible, locked away by the king's inability to fully embrace its healing grace. It was a paradox. The source of healing was present, but the path to its activation remained obscured. Historians and literary scholars still disagree on the precise origins of the Fisher King's wound. Some argue it's a direct allegorical representation of the spiritual decay within the Arthurian court itself, a consequence of sin and moral failing. Others suggest it's a more literal interpretation of a wound sustained in defense of the Grail, a heroic but ultimately debilitating injury. Still others delve into the Celtic roots, linking it to the maimed king archetype, a figure whose suffering is a necessary precursor to renewal. The ambiguity surrounding the wound only deepens the mystery, allowing for multiple layers of interpretation, making the Fisher King a potent symbol of universal suffering and the longing for redemption. It was during this period that the true nature of their quest began to crystallize for Percival. He had always seen the Grail as a glorious prize, a symbol of chivalric achievement. But now, witnessing the Fisher King's agony, he understood it was more than that. It was a vessel of healing, a promise of renewal, a beacon of hope for a world teetering on the brink of spiritual desolation. He remembered the tale of the Grail's first appearance, how it had brought sustenance and comfort, and he longed to see that power restored. The challenge, however, was not simply to find the Grail, but to understand the conditions for its healing power to manifest. The legend spoke of a single, crucial question that must be asked of the Fisher King, a question that, if posed correctly and with a pure heart, would break the curse and heal both king and land. But what was this question? And who was worthy to ask it? Percival, in his earlier, more naive encounter with the Fisher King, had failed to ask the question. He had been too caught up in the etiquette of the court, too afraid to appear rude or impertinent. He had seen the king's suffering, but had not understood its profound significance or the weight of his own responsibility. This failure haunted him, a silent reproach that fueled his determination now. He knew that the path to the Grail was not just one of physical endurance, but of spiritual awakening, of learning to see beyond the surface and truly connect with the suffering of others. The knights spent their days in quiet contemplation, serving the king, listening to the hushed whispers of the retainers, and piecing together the fragmented lore of the Grail. They learned of the king's lineage, stretching back to Joseph of Arimathea, the first guardian of the Grail in Britain. This was not just a random king, but a sacred lineage, a direct link to the very origins of the Grail's presence in their world. The king's suffering was thus not merely personal, but a wound in the very lineage of its guardianship, a tear in the fabric of sacred tradition. The air in the castle seemed to hum with an unspoken tension, a sense of waiting. The knights, for all their martial prowess, felt a profound helplessness. They could not fight this enemy with swords. They could only watch and wait, hoping for a sign, a revelation. It was a test of patience, of empathy, and of spiritual fortitude. The Fisher King, in his suffering, became a living embodiment of the world's yearning for redemption. His wound was the world's wound, his pain the world's pain. And the Grail, hidden yet present, was the promise of its healing. The quest was no longer just a search for a mystical object. It was a journey into the heart of suffering, a pilgrimage towards compassion, and a profound understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. The fate of the land, the king, and indeed their very souls seemed to hang in the balance, awaiting the moment when the right question would finally be asked and the healing light of the Grail would once again shine forth. The world, for Galahad, Percival, and Bors, had narrowed to a single luminous point. Their journey, once a winding path through shadowed forests and across wind-swept plains, now felt like an ascent, each step bringing them closer to an unimaginable summit. They had sailed across the treacherous seas, their small vessel guided not by charts or stars, but by an inner compass of unwavering faith. The very air around them seemed to shimmer with an ethereal light, carrying whispers of ancient hymns and the scent of blossoms from a garden unseen. They arrived at last at the castle of Corbinic, a place that seemed to exist outside the ordinary flow of time. Its stones, though ancient, glowed with an inner radiance, and the air within its walls hummed with a profound stillness. This was the castle of the Fisher King, the wounded guardian of the Grail, whose suffering mirrored the desolation of his lands. But as the three knights approached, a sense of healing, subtle yet undeniable, began to emanate from the very fabric of the place. They were led into a grand hall where a table was set, not for a feast of earthly delights, but for a communion of the spirit. The air grew thick with anticipation, a sacred hush falling over all who were present. And then it appeared, not with a blinding flash or a thunderous pronouncement, but with a gentle unfolding, as if the veil between worlds had simply thinned. The Holy Grail, held aloft by a maiden of unparalleled grace, entered the hall. It was not as they had imagined, perhaps, a chalice of gold encrusted with jewels. Instead, it seemed to be wrought of pure light, its substance shimmering and shifting, reflecting not the world around it, but an inner luminescence. A soft, warm glow filled the chamber, banishing all shadows, not with brightness, but with a single unfolding wind, but with an enveloping presence that soothed the soul. The very air became imbued with a fragrance unlike any earthly scent, a blend of frankincense, myrrh, and something else, something transcendent, like the essence of pure joy. For Galahad, the vision was a culmination, an answer to a lifelong quest. He felt a profound peace settle over him, deeper than any he had ever known. The weight of the world, the burdens of his quest, the very concept of time, seemed to dissolve. He saw not just the Grail, but through it, into the heart of divine love itself. It was a moment of pure understanding, where all mysteries were unveiled, and all questions answered without a single word being spoken. He felt himself lifted, not physically, but spiritually, into a state of grace. His earthly body, he knew, could not long contain such profound spiritual rapture. Percival, too, was overwhelmed. He remembered his youth, his innocent beginnings in the forest, his long and arduous journey of self-discovery and purification. The Grail before him was not just a vessel. It was a mirror reflecting his own soul, cleansed and made whole. He saw the path he had walked, the errors he had made, and the lessons he had learned, all culminating in this sacred moment. A wave of forgiveness washed over him, not just for himself, but for all the imperfections of the world. He felt a connection to something ancient and eternal, a lineage of seekers who had yearned for this very vision. The air around him felt like a gentle caress, and he felt a deep, abiding love for all creation. And Bors, the steadfast and loyal companion, experienced the Grail's presence as a profound affirmation of his faith and his unwavering commitment to his companions. He had faced temptations, endured hardships, and never wavered from his path. The Grail, for him, was a tangible manifestation of the divine grace he had always striven to serve. He felt a surge of strength, not of the body, but of the spirit, a renewed sense of purpose that transcended any earthly ambition. He saw the interconnectedness of all things, the divine pattern woven into the tapestry of existence. A quiet joy filled his heart, a deep contentment that settled into his very bones. In that sacred space, they partook of a spiritual communion. The Grail offered not food or drink, but in essence, a pure spiritual nourishment that filled them to their very core. The Fisher King, too, was healed in that moment. The wounds that had plagued him for so long, both physical and spiritual, began to close, and a renewed vitality flowed through him. His lands, too, would begin to recover, the blight lifting, and the rivers flowing freely once more. This profound healing, often described in texts like the Vulgate cycle, was a testament to the Grail's power to restore not just individuals, but entire realms. Historians still debate the precise nature of the Grail's appearance and its effects. Was it a literal object or a spiritual vision? The medieval texts, while rich in detail, often blend the tangible with the metaphorical, leaving room for interpretation. Some scholars suggest that the descriptions of the Grail's light and warmth were attempts to convey an experience beyond human language, a profound spiritual encounter that transcended the senses. Others argue for a more literal interpretation, believing in a physical relic endowed with miraculous properties. The mystery, perhaps, is part of its enduring allure. Following this profound experience, Galahad knew his earthly journey was complete. He had achieved the ultimate quest, seen the truth, and his soul yearned to return to its source. He bid farewell to Percival and Bors, a silent understanding passing between them. He ascended to a higher plane, his spirit merging with the divine light he had witnessed. His body, some accounts say, was taken up into heaven, leaving no trace, a testament to his unparalleled purity. This ascension, often depicted as Galahad's ultimate reward, solidified his status as the purest knight, the one truly worthy of the Grail. Percival and Bors, though heartbroken by Galahad's departure, carried the profound memory of the Grail with them. They returned to their lives, forever changed. Percival, having witnessed the ultimate truth, chose a path of contemplation and spiritual devotion. He retired to a hermitage, dedicating his remaining days to prayer and reflection, sharing the wisdom he had gained with those who sought it. His journey, from an innocent youth to a profound mystic, was complete. He became a living testament to the transformative power of the quest. Bors, ever the pragmatist and the loyal companion, returned to Camelot. He carried the tale of the Grail, a story of wonder and ultimate truth, back to King Arthur and the remaining knights of the Round Table. His account, though perhaps met with awe and a touch of melancholy, served as a final, poignant chapter to the grand saga of Arthur's reign. He was the living link between the earthly kingdom and the divine mystery, a reminder of the spiritual quest that had once animated the heart of Camelot. The Grail, having revealed itself and fulfilled its purpose, vanished once more from the earthly realm. It returned to its hidden sanctuary, perhaps to await another time, another age, when humanity might once again be ready for its profound truth. Its departure left a void, a longing in the hearts of those who had witnessed its glory, but also a profound sense of peace and understanding. The quest for the Grail, though seemingly concluded, had left an indelible mark on the world, shaping the very ideals of chivalry, purity, and spiritual striving. The castle of Corbinic, too, faded back into the mists of legend, its stones perhaps whispering stories to the stars. Its memory preserved in the hearts of those who had been touched by its sacred presence. The Fisher King, healed and restored, continued his guardianship, no longer burdened by suffering, but now a beacon of hope and renewal. The legacy of the Grail, however, lived on. It became a symbol, not just of a lost relic, but of an eternal quest, the human yearning forever. Meaning for purity, for a connection to something greater than themselves. It spoke of the power of faith, the importance of perseverance, and the transformative potential of a life dedicated to higher ideals. The story of the Grail became woven into the very fabric of Western imagination, inspiring countless artists, writers, and seekers through the centuries. Even today, the mystery endures. Where did the Grail go? Does it still exist, hidden somewhere, waiting to be rediscovered by a pure heart? Or was its true nature always spiritual, a symbol of an inner journey rather than an external object? The beauty of the Grail legend lies in its enduring ambiguity, its capacity to resonate with each generation in new and profound ways. It reminds us that the greatest treasures are often not found in gold or jewels, but in the depths of the human spirit, in the pursuit of truth, and in the unwavering belief in something beyond ourselves. The echoes of its light, though unseen, continue to illuminate the path for those who dare to seek. The air, once thick with the scent of ancient forests and the distant clash of steel, now held a different kind of stillness, a quietude that settled over the land after the Grail's departure. It was not a silence of absence, but one of profound presence, as if the very fabric of reality had been subtly rewoven by the sacred vessel's brief manifestation. For those who remained, a new understanding had dawned, a quiet knowing that transcended the clamor of earthly pursuits. The quest for the Holy Grail had not merely been a search for an object, it had been a crucible, forging souls and revealing the hidden pathways to deeper truths. Galahad, the purest knight, had ascended with the Grail, his earthly form dissolving into the ethereal light that enveloped the sacred vessel. His departure was not mourned with tears of sorrow, but with a sense of awe and reverence, for he had fulfilled his destiny. Bridging the gap between the mundane and the divine, Percival, too, had found his peace, choosing a contemplative life in the wilderness, his days spent in quiet reflection, the echoes of the Grail's glory resonating within him. Bors, the steadfast and loyal, returned to Camelot, carrying with him not the Grail itself, but its indelible imprint on his spirit. He became a living testament to the quest. His quiet strength and unwavering faith, a beacon for those who sought guidance in the aftermath. But the departure of the Grail and its chosen knights left a palpable void in Camelot. The Round Table, once vibrant with the clinking of goblets and the boisterous tales of chivalry, now seemed to hold a different weight. Arthur, though he had glimpsed the Grail's splendor, felt the bittersweet pang of its absence most acutely. He had led his knights on the greatest of quests, yet its ultimate fulfillment lay beyond his earthly grasp. The ideals of Camelot, born from the dreams of justice and honor, had been tested and refined by the Grail's pursuit, but the very perfection it embodied also highlighted the inherent imperfections of the human world. The legacy of the Grail, however, was not one of loss, but of transformation. Its journey through the earthly realm had illuminated the path to spiritual enlightenment, not as a destination, but as a continuous journey of self-discovery and purification. The ideals of purity, humility, and unwavering faith, once abstract concepts, had been given tangible form through the quest. Even for those who had not seen the Grail, its influence rippled outwards, inspiring acts of charity, fostering a deeper sense of community, and subtly shifting the moral compass of the age. Yet, the historical accounts of the Grail's departure are shrouded in a mystical ambiguity, much like its arrival. While some texts, such as the Vulgate cycle, describe Galahad's ascension with the Grail to the heavens, others are less explicit, simply stating that the Grail vanished or returned to its own place. This lack of definitive, universally accepted documentation adds to its enigmatic allure, allowing for a tapestry of interpretations to flourish across centuries. Historians still debate whether the concept of the Grail's physical departure was a later theological embellishment to emphasize its divine nature, or if it truly reflected an early belief in its otherworldly origin and destiny. The earliest Arthurian romances, like Chrétien de Troyes' Percival, are notably silent on the Grail's ultimate fate, focusing more on the hero's journey and the mysteries surrounding the Fisher King. It wasn't until later cycles, particularly the Cistercian-influenced narratives of the 13th century, that the Grail's explicit ascension with Galahad became a central theme, tying its destiny to a specific, pure-hearted knight. The very act of the Grail's departure, its return to a realm beyond human sight, underscored its transcendental nature. It was never meant to be a permanent fixture in the earthly world, a static object to be possessed. Instead, it was a catalyst, a divine intervention designed to awaken humanity to higher truths. Its brief presence had been a profound teaching, a demonstration that true spiritual wealth lay not in material possessions or worldly power, but in the purity of heart and the unwavering pursuit of righteousness. As the years passed, the memory of the Grail quest began to intertwine with the legends of Camelot itself. The Round Table, though diminished, remained a symbol of the ideals it once championed. Arthur continued to rule, his wisdom deepened by the profound experiences of the quest, his reign now tinged with a quiet melancholy. The glory days when knights rode out in search of the impossible had passed, replaced by the more mundane realities of governance and defense. Yet the spirit of the quest, the yearning for perfection, continued to resonate within the kingdom's heart. The challenges that followed the Grail's departure were not lesser, but different. The internal strife, the seeds of discord that had always lurked beneath Camelot's shining veneer, began to sprout with greater vigor. Lancelot, despite his profound encounter with the Grail's power, found himself increasingly ensnared by his earthly affections, his loyalty to Arthur strained by his love for Guinevere. This human frailty, a stark contrast to Galahad's unwavering purity, highlighted the enduring struggle between the sacred and the profane within the human heart. The Grail had offered a glimpse of perfection, but it could not erase the inherent complexities and temptations of the mortal world. The ideals of Camelot, once seemingly unshakable, began to show cracks. The unity fostered by the shared pursuit of the Grail slowly eroded as personal ambitions and unresolved conflicts resurfaced. The great quest had momentarily unified the knights, binding them in a common elevated purpose. But once that purpose was fulfilled, or rather, once the Grail departed, the underlying tensions within the court resurfaced, much like a tide receding to reveal the jagged rocks beneath. The very spiritual intensity that the Grail had brought also, perhaps inadvertently, intensified the subsequent disillusionment for those who could not sustain its lofty standards. The decline of Camelot, often attributed to the affair between Lancelot and Guinevere, and the subsequent betrayal of Mordred, can also be seen through the lens of the Grail's legacy. The quest had set an impossibly high standard, a spiritual benchmark that few could maintain. For those who had failed to achieve the Grail, or who had only glimpsed its fleeting glory, a sense of inadequacy or spiritual exhaustion might have set in. The focus shifted from the transcendent to the terrestrial, from the pursuit of divine grace to the protection of earthly power. Consider the historical context. The Arthurian legends, including the Grail narratives, evolved significantly during the High Middle Ages, a period marked by profound spiritual and social shifts in Europe. The rise of monastic orders, the Crusades, and the increasing emphasis on personal piety all contributed to the theological depth infused into the Grail stories. The concept of the Grail's departure, therefore, can be interpreted as a reflection of the medieval understanding of divine grace. It is offered, it inspires, but it does not remain indefinitely in a world deemed imperfect. The spiritual enlightenment it offered was meant to be internalized, to transform individuals from within. Rather than relying on an external, miraculous presence, the enduring impact of the Grail, even after its departure, lay in its power as a symbol. It represented the ultimate quest, the yearning for something beyond the material, the pursuit of spiritual perfection. It became a touchstone for chivalric ideals, influencing the conduct of knights and the aspirations of rulers for centuries. The tales of the Grail, passed down through generations, continued to inspire artists, poets, and mystics, each finding new layers of meaning in its enigmatic journey. The very uncertainty surrounding its fate allowed for a continuous reinterpretation, keeping its spiritual flame alive. The forests that once echoed with the thundering hooves of questing knights gradually reclaimed their ancient silence. The castles, once bustling with life, stood as silent sentinels, their stones whispering tales of glory and sorrow. Yet, the legacy of the Grail persisted, not as a physical object, but as an enduring ideal. It taught that true nobility lay not in birthright or conquest, but in purity of heart and unwavering faith. It demonstrated that the greatest journeys were often inward, leading to a profound understanding of self and spirit. Even in the fading light of Camelot, the ideals forged in the crucible of the Grail quest continued to shine. The pursuit of justice, the defense of the innocent, the courage to face impossible odds, these were the lessons etched into the very soul of the kingdom. The Grail had departed, but its spiritual essence lingered, a silent promise that even in a world of imperfection, the quest for something higher, something divine, would forever remain. The story of the Holy Grail, from its mysterious arrival to its ethereal departure, thus became not merely a tale of a sacred artifact, but a timeless parable of humanity's eternal yearning for enlightenment, a testament to the enduring power of faith and the transformative journey of the human spirit. The very air, once vibrant with the quest, now held the quiet echoes of a perfection glimpsed, a truth revealed, and a legacy that transcended the bounds of time and earthly presence.